Let's talk about sleep. Since you've chosen this habit pathway, you probably know that getting enough sleep is kind of important. And while it may not seem like the most exciting habit in the world, rest assured, pun intended, you've chosen well. Sleep is one of the most powerful domino habits there is because it has a knock-on effect in nearly every aspect of your life. Hitting the hay early is a habit that could give you more energy to exercise, help regulate your appetite, make you more productive at work, more patient with your partner, and give you more willpower to avoid temptations like mindless scrolling. Adults need around 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night, and yet so many of us aren't getting anywhere near that amount. Research shows that 32.6% of working adults reported sleeping 6 or fewer hours per night, and that's a big problem. Insufficient sleep has an estimated economic impact of over $411 billion each year in the United States alone, and that's for 3 main reasons. First, physical health issues. Lack of sleep dramatically increases the odds of having everything from mood disorders to cancer, putting a serious strain on the healthcare system. And 2, reduced emotional health. The underslept brain swings excessively to both extremes of emotional stability, positive and negative, and impaired productivity and performance. With prolonged chronic sleep restriction, an individual will actually acclimate their impaired performance, lower alertness, and reduced energy levels. A physician study published in The Lancet proved that sleep-deprived individuals took 14% longer to complete a task and made 20% more errors than individuals who were well rested. Now, getting a better night's sleep seems like it should be a pretty straightforward pursuit. After all, what could be easier than sleeping? You literally just lie there. But as anyone who has ever experienced the pain of consistently falling short on their sleep each night, it's not always as simple as it sounds. Becoming your best rested self is really made up of a series of smaller, interrelated habits that help you fall asleep and stay asleep. So on this pathway to becoming a star sleeper, we're gonna look at some of the small steps you can take to get the best sleep of your life. First, cut your caffeine. I love coffee, but unfortunately, an over-reliance on caffeine creates a vicious sleep-sabotaging cycle. We guzzle coffee or energy drinks in an attempt to compensate for our compromised efficiency the next day, which leaves us wired and over-caffeinated all night, and the cycle continues. If you find that you're getting sluggish later in the afternoon without a second cup of coffee, it's probably an indicator that you're not getting enough sleep. Caffeine works by blocking your adenosine receptors, a crucial chemical that promotes sleepiness. So it doesn't really give you a boost of energy as much as it masks the fact that you're tired, similar to how pain relievers simply cover up pain. But what goes up must come down. This pent-up adenosine eventually breaks through, causing a dramatic crash, often at inopportune times, just like before your 4 p.m. meeting. But it also hangs around long enough to seriously disrupt your sleep, especially if you're drinking it later in the day. In a double-blind study, researchers found that consumption of a caffeine dose equivalent to that in a double espresso 3 hours before habitual bedtime induced a 40-minute phased delay of circadian melatonin rhythm in humans. Caffeine has a half-life of around 5 hours. That is, by the time that you finish your last sip of coffee, it takes 5 hours for your body to get rid of half of the caffeine. After another 5 hours, the remaining caffeine is once again halved. And so if you want to get better sleep, cut yourself off from caffeine at least 10 hours before bed. So if you go to bed at 10 p.m. each night, that means that you really need to cut your caffeine and maybe your last cup of coffee at 12 p.m. By intentionally cutting yourself off at least 10 hours before you go to bed, you're giving yourself a chance to diminish most of the effects that caffeine delivers. Here's your simple habit. Cut yourself off from caffeine at least 10 hours before going to bed. You might want to substitute your afternoon coffee or energy drink with something caffeine-free, like peppermint tea. Next, if you want to get a better night's sleep, it's probably time to step away from your smartphone. According to the National Sleep Foundation, using screens before bed delays your body's internal clock, suppresses the release of sleep-inducing hormones, and makes it more difficult to fall asleep. A study found that compared to reading a printed book, reading on an iPad delayed the rise in melatonin by up to 3 hours. The blue glow of our screens is dialed to match the sunlight. Most devices now have the ability to switch to night mode. This acts to change the color temperature of your screen as the sun sets, making screens a warmer color temperature. But contrary to what you might think, recent research has shown that this might even make the problem worse. Studies have found that brightness has more of an impact and more of an effect than color temperature. So a glowing screen, blue or not, will still confuse your brain into thinking it's daylight. The better solution is to avoid screens completely at least 1 hour before bed. If you struggle to actually tear yourself away from your phones, most phones now have an inbuilt digital well-being setting where you can automatically kick yourself off certain apps. At this point, you might want to replace that 1 hour of screen time with a digital sunset or wind down routine. This is an advanced habit tactic and one that we'll cover in more detail in the lesson Stack Your Habits, but I think it's worthwhile to mention it now. Once you've kicked yourself off your devices, you'll likely find it easier to replace that time with something more beneficial to your mental health or your relationships. This is the perfect opportunity to do a self-growth activity like reading, journaling, meditating, or maybe a combination of all three. By creating a systematic routine of 2 or more items and scheduling them at the same time each night, you can build momentum and ride the wave of the first habit. Here's your simple habit. Turn off all screens 1 hour before bed. To do this, you can set your alarm 1 hour before you go to bed. Once the alarm rings, then turn off all of your devices. So one of the biggest misconceptions that I've personally made about my own sleep habits is that I always thought that if I was giving myself 8 hours in bed, that I'd get close to 8 hours of sleep. But the moment that I started to track my sleep, I realized that that assumption was totally wrong. While it takes me roughly 30 minutes to get to bed each night, I also tend to toss and turn a lot throughout the night. By tracking my sleep, I realized that I was consistently getting less than 8 hours of sleep a night. And occasionally, I'd even have nights where I got less than 6 hours of sleep. And so to make up for this, I started to plan a little bit of buffer time into my sleep schedule. If I truly wanted to get 8 hours of sleep in a given night, I'd often have to give myself 9 hours in bed. Sleep as a physiological process is similar to landing a plane. It takes time for your brain to gradually descend down onto the firm bedrock of good sleep. It's much easier to doze off smoothly if you're at ease and you've given your body a chance to adjust. So make sure that you give yourself more than enough time to achieve a smooth landing. Here's your simple habit. Depending on how much sleep you're aiming for each night, add 1 hour to the top of it. You might not feel like you have the time for it, but give it a try for 30 days and see how much more energized you feel. You might just find that you'll easily make up for that 1 hour you've invested in sleep by being more alert and more productive during your waking hours. And now we've come to your big moment. While I'm sure that you love nothing more than to tackle all of these changes at once, it's important to get really focused. So open up your workbook to exercise 4 to pick the one habit that you're gonna stick with for the rest of the course. You can use one of the 3 that I mentioned in this lesson, or you can come up with something completely different that's tailored more to your own sleep goals. Use the checklist in the workbook to pressure test your habit to make sure it's easy, specific, and intentional. Putting down your habit into writing is really simple and it seems trivial, but trust me, it's an incredibly powerful step to keep you committed for the long run.